everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is Phish Twitter mainstay Scott Marks of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation. If you've ever looked up a setlist on Phish.net, noticed a tease in the middle of a jam, or discovered a crazy bust-out statistic, Scott is part of the team that keeps track of all of that on Phish.net. He's also widely known on Twitter for tweeting out live setlists at BizArchive, BizArchive. I first knew about Scott years ago when he began to tweet setlist updates in real time on Twitter at shows he attended. Many times his tweets would beat out the official Phish from the Road account, even if just by a few milliseconds, but in this world of on-demand information where we all desire instant gratification for Phish, his feed is and was priceless. Once I got in touch with Scott, he was game to come on the podcast right away, but we had a little bit of trouble figuring out which show or jam to select. Scott threw out a whole lot of ideas and dates, but so many of them were already taken on Attendance Bias that we had to go pretty far down the list until we settled on segments of September 6th, 2015 at Dick's, which featured the famous Thank You Encore as well as other highlights. I'm glad that's where we ended up, because there was so much to talk about in this fun show, even just in its isolated segments. We talked about Phish's rich history at Dick's, themed shows, and even surprising encore stats, plus much more, are all touched on today. So let's join Scott to talk about Bye Bye Foot, long-awaited bust-outs, and why themed set lists mean so much to us, as we discuss Phish's performance on September 6, 2015 at Dick's Stadium in Commerce City, Colorado. Scott, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
My pleasure. I'm excited today to talk about segments from Phish's show on September 6, 2015 at Dick's, where you picked out some of your favorite segments of the show proper. And then we're going to go over the encore, arguably the best one they've ever played, but we'll leave that for later. So to get started, most people would know you from your Twitter feed, but also from Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation. Can you give us a little background about the Mockingbird Foundation and what you do for them?
The Mockingbird Foundation is a nonprofit that has raised money for music education for kids going back 25 years. And we're approaching $2 million that we've given to schools through grants. And it's run by Phish fans. And it's been a part of the Phish community for quite some time. I'm on the board of directors for the foundation. I do social media for the Twitter side. I've been involved with events that we've done in person. We did the screening for the Phish 3D movie After Indio. We had a sample in a jar in Chicago from 2013 and other events that we've done tied into the shows. I'll volunteer for those as well. I've reviewed grants that have come in the past. But my primary role is the social media point.
And I think that's appropriate because the way I first became aware of you was through Twitter when you started live tweeting set lists during shows. And for anyone out there who is listening but may not know, what is your Twitter handle?
It's BizArchive.
BizArchive. So BizArchive. And I imagine most people listening to this, I feel like I'm pretty low on the social media Phish ladder community. So if you're listening to me or you're aware of me via Twitter, you certainly know about Scott. So I'm curious. I love this access as a fan, not being at a show, but finding out what they're playing song to song. At what point did the idea occur to you to live tweet the set list?
So Youngblog, going back to 2009, would have like a guest tweeter. So somebody would log into the account and would live tweet the shows. It's before I had a Twitter account. And so I think the earliest show I remember live tweeting from was Halloween set at Indio. I probably did it like once or twice that summer as well. That was when I first got involved with reporting from the show.
And it was fairly new at that time, not Twitter necessarily, but the idea of fans getting that real-time information as far as compared to when you and I probably started seeing shows of going to a phone booth at the venue at set break. and looking at the random piece of hotel stationery, the Best Western stationery that we had, and jotted down what they played in the first set and calling someone to upload like Andy Gadiel's page.
Well, I definitely remember in 2000, I would reach out to Brian Reen, who ran fans.com.
A PHANS.
Yep. That site hasn't been around in a long time, but I definitely was doing that after some of the summer 2000 shows.
I remember driving down to Hampton with my girlfriend at the time. We stopped about halfway down or a little more, maybe around Baltimore, we stopped. And when we stopped, it was around the time Phish was taking the stage. And I told her, no, you have to drive. So I can look on my phone, my Razor, and I can refresh Phish.com and see what they open with. Like, it was so exciting to me. What do you think it is about fans and Phish knowing first? What do you think it is about our fan base in particular that it's a thrill to find out what they played now or just now at that moment compared to, you know what, I'm going to lay off and I'll find out tomorrow what they played?
I think part of it is because it's out there. Other bands, a lot of them don't tweet the set lists. I can think of some that do, like Umphreys and Mo, Government Mule, Disco Biscuits. So I would imagine it's similar for those fan bases where they'll want to know what's going on. Phish just seems to be more followers or more fans, or not to discount the other bands at all. With these bands, you're playing different stuff every night. And so it's not like you're going to get the same set list. And so the fact that you could have 200, 230, 50, 60, 70 songs played in a year, they'll bust out things or whatever. And then you kind of want to know, well, what did they play last night? Maybe I want to know now. And so because it's there, people take advantage of it.
That immediacy, I think, is part of the culture too. The kind of a mix of FOMO and being the first on your block to find out. I don't know what it is about Phish, but I still feel it after all these years. And you tweet in real time, basically, while you're at the show. Do you ever get distracted? Like, the way I always picture you is like you see it almost as a mission, because like you're looking at your phone and you have to tap it out as soon as you hear the notes. Do you feel that way, or am I way off?
If it becomes a distraction, I put the phone away. For example, if somebody puts me on the rail for a song or two and I'm not going to have my phone out, really get into the moment. And not that I don't get into the moment when I'm not up close. If there's a New Year's gag going on, I will stop what I'm doing and just take it all in. And then maybe 15, 20 minutes later, I will circle back and fill in the blanks. So at that point, it's not in real time, but I do want to enjoy myself at the show. You're looking at tweeting out a song that takes 5 seconds to do versus notes is to, well, all right, Trey's stuck up on top of the stage for the rescue squad, or dancers have come out, or clones or whatnot. So it's different where you kind of want to take that whole thing in because it's different and unique versus just, all right, they just played Long Boy, they played Hydrogen or Weekapog or something. And it takes a couple seconds to tweet out and then put the phone down and enjoy the show. When I live tweet, it's not that I'm not enjoying the show. It's just something that I always think kind of keeps me grounded into what's going on. My feet on the ground, if you will. So if I didn't like doing it, I wouldn't do it.
Has it ever happened that you felt more of an obligation to tweet than you're able to stay in the moment, or are you just completely able to separate those two things?
Doesn't impact me at all. I don't really get into conversations when I live tweet, and I also keep the phone as dark as it's going to go, so it's not going to be bright and interfering with other people. I really want to blend in to what's going on as much as possible. Obviously, if I have the phone out, I'm not completely blending in, but if it's out for a couple seconds and the phone's down, it's really not that much.
Has Phish ever stumped you with a song, like aside from the first time they've ever played a new debut? Like, I think when they played Bliss, I think it was a few years ago, maybe it was during the New Year's run, or when they played Glide 2 in the middle of a Mike's Groove. Like, have you ever had to ask someone around you, what song are they playing?
In the 90s, I did. When I was still learning the songs, the first couple of shows, especially my first show, I definitely was asking what was going on. I mean, now I don't need to ask because if I don't know what it's going to be on, Fish from the Road.
That's true. Yeah.
But in terms of being stumped, mock song is not one of my common songs I'm very familiar with. And so sometimes it takes a couple of measures or a bit to remember what that one is. And I think Bye Bye Foot in Providence in 2019 took a little bit as well because again they hadn't played in so long, and again it's not a common song, so it's very rare that I'm not right on the go to have the song.
Well, in any case, Scott, we got to know you a little bit as a personality, at least as a Phish fan, tweeting personality. But let's get to know a little bit about your background as a fan with the attendance bias lightning round.
Attendance bias lightning round.
So, Scott, when was your first show?
11/26/97.
Oh, that's a classic.
Hartford Civic Center.
Yeah. What are some of your impressions of it? Your best memories?
You have that monster Character Zero to start out the second set. The 2001, the Cities and the Yamar, some great segues mixed in there, and then you have the opening tweezer to start things out too. The show was right in the middle of fall '97, which is my favorite era of Phish. I am glad to have caught at least one show from that month plus tour.
How familiar were you with the band going in?
Very familiar. I had gone into them 3 years ago, spring of '94, and I had, I think, most, if not all, their CDs at that point, and had a couple of tapes. And so I had wanted to go the year before, but I wasn't around. I played in Hartford '96 as well, so I had wanted to go for a while before I actually saw my first show.
What's your most recent show, and what did you think of it?
My most recent show was Halloween in Vegas, and that was the Sci-Fi Soldier set in the middle of that. And I felt that it's another turning point in Phish history where you're going to see these songs starting to appear this year, and it'll be very interesting to see how they're woven into the set list and the songs become jam vehicles.
You've got a time machine. You can go back to witness any Phish moment on stage or off. Where or when do you go?
I'd probably want to be at that first show with the hockey sticks for the microphones and the UVM dorm to witness that piece of history. If I knew what I knew now and I could go back and see that, I'd love to see them at Nectar's. I'd love to see them at the first Halloween show, the Glen Falls with the White Album. So, but I had to choose one. It would probably be the first show. I just want to be there for posterity's sake and to witness what was going on. I wouldn't want to interact with the band. I would just want to be there and see everything that happened.
And make sure that they don't put Thriller on at the break. Make sure they say, no, this band's really good. Let's keep them.
Like the butterfly effect, right? Where you completely change history.
Yeah, we got to start a new show that's like
Quantum Leap.
Quantum Leap, right? You could Quantum Leap, and you could be one of the guests at the first show. Next up, this is a safe space. Your most controversial Phish opinion.
I really like Jennifer Dances.
I don't think it's that bad. I also like Dr. Gable when they played it.
That's my most controversial opinion because I know a lot of people don't like Jennifer Dances. I can't say that I secretly love it because I post about it a couple times a year. Yeah, I realize it's kind of a cheesy song and the lyrics aren't that great, but the melody, I guess I kind of like it. So I'm in the Jennifer Dances camp.
You know, I think they've really embraced cheesy lyrics and big power chords lately. So maybe it's time for a Jennifer Dances comeback. You never know.
What is your most controversial opinion?
I'm not a huge fan of Walls of the Cave. I had, maybe it was issues with myself during 2.0, but I thought that a lot of the songs during Round Room, I think a lot of people who feel the way now about a lot of the newer, like Big Boat and Soul, Ocean, Love, Light, like a lot of those songs that have that motif or those themes. I feel that way about a lot of songs from 2.0. So it took me a long time for Waves, for Walls of the Cave, Seven Below. I just never not attached to them. So Walls of the Cave, I could take it or leave it.
I saw a decent amount of shows in 2.0, all the ones in 2004 outside of Letterman and a handful of 2003. So the songs definitely grew on me through those shows. And I think with Walls of the Cave, it has a special significance with the ties to 9/11. And so kind of hits home in terms of being more meaningful than other songs.
For me, what it's been is the sound quality. I think in 3.0, their in-house sound has been better for a lot of 1 and 2.0. And then when they get into that big Silent Trees ending, now it's grown on me, because to me, it sounds more like a big arena rock band than, for whatever reason, it didn't sound that way to me back in 2003 and 2004. So it's grown on me, but that's my most controversial opinion as of the moment.
So you didn't expect to put on the hot seat yourself now, did you?
No, I'm the host.
Nobody puts the host on the hot seat.
Yeah. When you start your podcast, give me a call, and then you could drill me on this. Do you woo or do you not woo?
I do not woo.
What's your favorite spot inside the venue?
I would say dead center is close as I can get.
You see the acronym SOAM on a set list. Is it Scent of a Mule or is it Split Open and Melt?
That's a tough one. Word association, I'd put Melt.
How many claps in Stash?
3.
Really? I always grew up with 2. I always thought from a live one, I thought it was 2.
I don't clap during Stash, so.
Oh, do you yell? This isn't on the list, but do you yell during Hood?
Sometimes.
Oh, okay. What's your favorite post-show snack?
Are we talking on the lot or like in a convenience store?
Wide open question. On the lot, after you've left the show, you have your druthers.
I don't know. I maybe a slice of pizza out in the lot. I usually have eaten at some point in the night. I try not to do a lot of late night eating if I can avoid it.
And finally, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
I don't know.
Get back to me on that one.
When was this show played?
So looking at today's choice, you chose September 6, 2015 at Dick's. And my usual question is, why do you have attendance bias toward this pick or toward this show? Let's just reveal, we were going back and forth for a little while, for about a week or a week and a half. So we settled on this show. And rather than go through an entire show, you picked some highlights, and then we did the thank you encore. And we'll get to that in a minute. But let's just take a look at where Phish was when Dick's in 2015 came around. So this was the 5th customary end of summer Labor Day weekend at Dick's for Phish, number 5. And by this point, it had established itself as a can't miss event for Phish, along the lines of Halloween, New Year's festival. Dick's has, by this point, kind of established itself right up there. So my understanding, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, that Dick's established itself. It's a unique venue choice of a soccer stadium. Phish doesn't play venues of that size that often. With a huge capacity. I think I found that it's up to 27,000. Its location is near a major American city that has plenty of lodging, travel, and for some reason, the band just crushes it there. Superlative playing, on par or better than, I would argue, some MSG runs of recent years. And the most fun part to me is that there's always some sort of themed set list throughout for at least one of the shows or one of the sets. Is there anything I left out for Dick's?
No, I think you kind of have to look at it into 2 halves. The first really is the first 5 years where you had that set list theme. And then everything else afterwards has been more or less just a typical 3-day weekend for Phish. They stopped doing the themes after this show, the thank you show, pretty much until the Vegas shows this past fall, when they did a full set list theme again, where you could look at a set list and see right off the bat by the names of the songs that they had a theme going. It's still a destination for a lot of fans though, because it's been that end of the summer celebration. It's not really a festival, but for years you had camping outside until the
plague.
that took care of that. So there's no more camping. For the most part, if you want to go, you're usually able to get a ticket because it's such a large venue at 25, 30,000 people, as opposed to where they played in the past in Morrison at Red Rocks, where I think that's 7,000-8,000 people. It's a lot harder to get everybody in there. You lose some of the sound quality going from Red Rocks to a soccer stadium, but you get a lot more people that are able to go experience it. So it's been a very special experience.
And along those lines, I've got the sense from talking to people, including Stephanie Jenkins, who I believe is also a member of the Mockingbird Foundation. She was one of my first guests on this show, and she chose, I forget which show. I'll have to go back and correct myself. It might have been the Fuck Your Face show. And I got the sense from her and others that it's kind of developed this family reunion vibe at Dick's, that everyone knows the dates it's going to be. Zooming out a little bit, in 2015, that summer was a banner tour for Phish. I saw a lot of shows that summer. I was coming off a divorce. And so I was like, I'm spoiling myself to no end. I'm going to go to every single show I could see. And so in 2015, there were new venues being played. Ascend Amphitheater in Nashville was brand new when they played it. Too many jams to mention. Magnaball. It seemed like they couldn't miss, and that's not even counting Fare Thee Well. Everything was hitting on 2015, and everyone was certain as Dick's was approaching that they were going to blow the roof off. What would they spell? What kind of games would they play? And I also remember that the first two shows, people were bitching online all over the place. They're not spelling anything. This run is the worst of all the Dick's runs. I have to imagine it was a different vibe. Do you remember?
I don't think the vibe was that it was the worst of the Dick's runs. Once you realized Friday night that they're not doing the theme, you move on. And you go and enjoy the show. And then, as we know, nothing lasts forever. And we were lucky to have the first 4 years that we had a theme that Friday night, which made what happened Sunday all that much more special. You try not to go into a show with expectations, because then, you just don't know what's going to happen, and you don't want to get disappointed if you're going to walk in there expecting a game henge and, get 10 random songs. That's probably a very stretch there for a game henge. But, again, if you're expecting like a 20-minute jams to show up in the show and you get a bunch of 8 or 9 minute songs, or you expect the 8 or 9 minute songs, you get 15, 20-minute jams. You just never know what's going to come out the door when the lights go down.
And that's why we keep going back. So, Scott, where were you in the summer of 2015 that led you to Dick's?
It was the annual tradition. So I'd flown out and did the Dick's shows. I had done Magnaball and some East Coast shows that year. So again, like everyone else, the show at the end was the shows at the end were that coda to the summer.
You chose The Landlady from set 1, Down with Disease and Piper from set 2, and then the entire encore. And when I saw you pick The Landlady, my first question immediately is, did you pick it because of the fact that it was a huge bust out? This was played for the first time as a standalone song since December 3rd, 1994 in San Jose, 768 shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it was kind of like a, wow, it's just really happening moment. You can't believe your ears when those first notes come out and they're actually doing it. It was something that I figured I was never going to see, and then all of a sudden there it was. And so it was a monumental start to the show, which kind of stands out from other songs in set that were more commonplace from that tour.
I've had that feeling so many times where it's almost like a dream you didn't know you had comes true right in front of you. When I saw them play Sparks on December 30th, 2016, I think it was, at Madison Square Garden, my whole world exploded. I thought it was over. I thought that they, aside from the S show at Dick's, actually, I didn't think that they'd ever play it again. That bust out feeling, it really carries a lot of weight with me. So set two, I think it's the second song. They played Down with Disease. What are your impressions of this? I have a ton of notes with Down with Disease, but what are your musical thoughts or memories of it?
I would probably put this Down with Disease as the song, the one song that I played the most in the last 6 years plus. While it's not the best jam or even the best Disease of the 3.0 era, in my opinion, it's my favorite. I think it's special when you have the band, in this case Trey, developing something mid-song, a riff, and letting it go and watching it grow. And it's kind of happy, upbeat music. And it's something I would go outside for a run, or if I'm kind of having a day where I'm not in the best mood, I'll put the Disease on, and then just kind of always uplifts you a little bit. And I remember at the start of the pandemic, when things were shutting down 2 years ago, I wasn't having a great afternoon, and I put the song on, and I was kind of like, well, these songs make me happy. And I posted out to the Twitter, what songs make you happy? And then for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, people posted stuff. And then I took the songs and I made a giant playlist. And then I gave the playlist back to the community as something that they had built. And I felt it was important to have that then. And pretty much in general, you find stuff that makes you happy, whether it's Phish or anything else. And that for me, it made me feel so good. And I wanted others to feel that way, and to what songs made them feel really good and to make others feel good. And so it was just kind of a community exercise that didn't start out that way.
It's very wholesome. It really is. You know, you don't get as much Twitter for me, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, is where a lot of people express their snark. And it's really nice to hear something like that. And I know what you mean. I wrote that in about 10 minutes. My note is, this is what 2015 Phish sounds like. Trey pulls it out into bliss jamming. I am here for it. Those were my notes. I don't know if it's the part that you're talking about, but it's almost a part where it sounds like they might go into Weekapaw groove. It's very rhythm based on Trey's part, at least.
You can start hearing it there, and then it gets, by the time you're around 11:45, the official melody within the jam begins. But it's definitely, it's a nice slow build, like the Piper used to be, the slow build Piper, the intro. And it was kind of the same way with the Disease, but you can definitely feel it coming, and then all of a sudden, boom, there it is.
That's what I wrote. I wrote it's calm and serene at 12 minutes. And then a progression begins soon. And I hope it continues and goes places. And it does. I was just thrilled by that latter half because the whole track is about 17 minutes or 17 and a half minutes. And you're right, at that 11 and a half or 12-minute mark, things really kick into high gear. And I had this thought. I was listening the other day to some 1993 Phish, and they were almost like schizophrenic at that time. The way I wrote it, I described it as a newborn chihuahua, like just sticking their nose into anything that might catch their attention. But in 2015, they were so patient and delicate. And I'm so glad that this progression flowers by the end of the track. By like 16 and a half minutes, they've capitalized on the whole thing. And this really is a delightful track. I can see why you chose it.
Yeah, it's definitely has meaning to me, and it's just one of the many highlights from this show.
Another highlight that you brought up is Piper. You mentioned a slow build, and I was surprised. This one has a quasi slow build.
There will be times in the car where I will put on a 97 Piper and just play the intro like 4 or 5 times. Maybe I'll get to the actual song and maybe I won't. I miss the intro so much. So anytime I get anything longer than the super fast intro these days, I'm a happy camper.
Well, they're done. Go ahead.
Bring back the slow intro, please.
I'll sign on to that petition on change.org. Bring back the slow Piper intro. I love that there's a melody or guitar line that Trey introduces at about 4 minutes. It's just bursting with feel-good melodies. Is it the same reason you picked this as you picked Down with Disease? Is it the way it makes you feel?
It's another high energy moment, and Trey starts it, plays it for like 10 or 15 seconds and stops it, and then thinks for like 10 seconds, and he goes back into it and plays it again. For me, it's just seeing something develop there. You get an idea and you stick with it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think with the Disease and the Piper, they both definitely hit their mark.
I agree. There's so many times during a good jam where I say to myself, I hope that he sticks with this. You know, I call it Trey DD. You know, he has something great for like 12 seconds, but then he's gone off into something else. And when he sticks with something that, at least to me, the one guy in a crowd of 18,000 or whatever thinks it sounds good, there's nothing that makes me happier than when they stick with it and build on it. And that happens in that Piper, in the part that you just mentioned. And then the next part that you chose is the encore. And I think one of the reasons you said to me is because you love themed shows.
I think for me, when you see a bunch of shows for any bands, if you get something that's out of the norm, it kind of sticks out more. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it worse. It makes it different and fresh. That encore started with Tweezer Reprise, which they had never opened an encore with that before. And the only time that they've done it since was 12/31/19.
Wait, they never opened an encore with Tweezer Reprise?
They did not. That was the first time.
You know, when I had Dave Steinberg on here and I asked him what inspired him to start a stat, like keeping stats, he said, I wanted to match up data with feelings. I'm not quoting him exactly, but I'm paraphrasing. And he said, you know, with the Grateful Dead, it would be that way too, where they would play Ramble on Rose, you know, to the second song in every set. And he would say, it feels like they always do this. And I wanted to say, but do they really? And kind of match up data with the way it feels. And I'm sure you're correct. But to say that they never opened an encore with Tweezer Reprise.
What I had put in my notes is that it was an interesting way to start the encore instead of finishing it. I didn't know at the time that they never opened an encore with it, but I did a little homework this afternoon, and I preparing for our podcast tonight, and I
You're talking
saw
to a
that,
teacher.
yes.
I love when they do your homework.
Yeah, and so those are the only two times that it's ever opened an encore. That in the Rescue Squad show. There are certain things I'll know right off the bat that are out of the norm, and I might not know at that time how out of the norm. I'm not going to sit there and thumb through, hundreds of Tweezer Reprises on my phone to see if it was ever opening an encore. But when you're sitting at your desk after work or at a table, since we're all working from home, and then you can go look it up and, oh, well, there it is. That was the first time.
That's bonkers. Well, I learned something new today. Thank you. Now you're the teacher. And after Tweezer Reprise, I would imagine that a lot of people thought that would be the only song for the encore, because these sets were full sets. They were like an hour and 20 and an hour and 19 minutes, something like that. So it's like, all right, Tweezer Reprise encore. They play Tweezer, makes sense. Let's enjoy it and go home. But then next they play Harpua, and holy moly, I would be freaking out. The whole place must have been, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like a holy shit moment where they're actually doing this. A Harpua with a good narration. Sometimes they're hit or miss. This one was definitely a hit.
Well, it becomes a theme throughout the whole encore, a half-hour-long encore, and Harpua is the connective tissue. I just couldn't believe it when I saw it on probably your Twitter feed. And I love that in the beginning, after the song part is over, Trey says, "Welcome, everyone. It's so good to be back here." And it just tickled me that it was the encore of the third night that he said, "Welcome, everybody." Like we're all getting ready to go home.
Hello, goodbye. Hello, goodbye.
Yeah. I thought of you immediately, not just because you picked it, but also when Trey says at 3:38, he says, "For those of you writing a song list," which I think is cute enough that he calls it a song list and not
your napkins.
Right. I used to use the Best Western, state bedside stationery. But he says Harpua only has to be listed once if you're writing it on the song list. I'm like, that's very particular. So now we see that something's bubbling.
When Harpua is in the song list, and this goes for Micah too, if you're listening, you only have to write it once if you're writing your little song list on the napkin or on your phone or something like that. If Harpua is in the song list, you only have to write it once. Thank you. Keep that in the back of your mind. Anyway, as I said, the little old man is like a guy who lives up in the mountains. He's an evil old guy. He's got this mangy dog, very mean. People in the town don't like him very much, and he becomes basically an outcast, and he's up in the woods. Meanwhile, the other character in our story, as you know, is the incredible Jimmy. Now, Jimmy is not of the mountains. Jimmy's he's like an East Coast guy who kind of moves out to Colorado. And so he's trying to get used to it.
Right. And, when we looked back at the set list afterwards, it's not really thank you, but in order to make it work, you had to make it thank you at that point. So if you started throwing in Harpuas outside there, then you lose the whole message of what's going on. And so, yeah, that's Harpua, but we're not gonna note it in the set list because that ruins it at that point.
Their house, their rules. And throughout the narration, Jimmy, he wants to sit down and listen to his favorite record, all the old records, and they start After Midnight, one of his favorite rock songs from the old days. And I don't know, talk about, this is subjective, of course, but talking about surprising statistics, I don't know if this song has one of the best "this song played at great shows" ratios of all time, that it's kind of anointing a show if they play After Midnight. Thoughts?
It's up there. You look at Big Cypress, you look at Manchester 2010.
New Year's 2010.
That as well. You look at those shows and there are some epic moments. The Big Cypress is my favorite show. And if we go outside of that into like top 5 shows that are not Big Cypress, Manchester 2010 is on that list as well. Definitely a special night. They played at the Gorge after J.J. Cale passed away. That had special meaning to as well.
Moving on, Trey says Jimmy's feeling weird. And this is, I think, the best part of the whole narration in terms of laughs. He said he's sucking an oxygen tank. I thought that came because, unless I'm wrong, I think this was the year that Phish from the Road published a photograph of Fishman backstage with like a blue velvet sort of gas mask on, of course, because it's Colorado, right? You need the oxygen. But maybe it was a whole setup to include NO2 in the thank you acronym. I don't know. This is actually, it's actually a pretty good narrative. It's better than most 3.0 Harpuas.
Makes sense to have the tank out there to do nitrous for the song, to have nitrous show up there.
Well, that's the joke, right? Jimmy says, maybe I shouldn't have gotten this tank from a guy in the parking lot at a Phish show.
Yeah, a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
You're breaking the fourth wall at that point. You're aware of what's going on.
And it goes from NO2 into Keyboard Army. And I figured I should ask you, as a person who's very well versed in set lists, when I was getting into Phish and I was collecting tapes, I thought it was Keyboard Cavalry as kind of a foil to Acoustic Army. Do you remember that?
His name was definitely tossed around at some point. Keyboard Cavalry is definitely somewhere in my memory bank, but they just ended up doing Keyboard Army instead. So acoustic and keyboard.
And I wanted to ask you, what does this look like? Because during their 20th anniversary video in Boston in 2003, I first got to see what Acoustic Army looked like. Where they all do the same pause and they rub the neck of the guitar at the same time. It's a whole performance. So Keyboard Army, I guess we'll call it now. Do they all just gather around Page's setup? Because I've never seen it. Okay.
That's exactly what they did. He has keyboards for everybody, so they're all playing in unison. It was something, again, that I never thought I would see because I hadn't played since 1995. And then there it was. So another special moment.
his mind. And then after a couple of minutes, his head starts to clear a little bit. He starts to feel a little bit better. And the bells start going away. And as he sits there, he looks down to his left and he thinks,
I was about to say, you're really knocking them down being in person to see all these rarities from the landlady to keyboard army. You're just, you're just having the greatest time. I
was having a really good time that night for sure.
I put myself in your shoes listening to this because I feel like I have the same sort of personality as you in terms of getting excited for rarities and set list tricks and themed shows. That really speaks to me. And so I could just imagine the thrill of being there. So we got Thank done. At this point, did you or those around you realize what's happening in terms of the set list?
Yeah, I think that you realize pretty quickly that they're spelling something out, probably by the nitrous, I would think, THAN. You realize that something was being spelled, if not sooner. And then obviously by the time K came around, everybody knew what was going on.
I would hope so. And then the next song really gives it away, which is Your Pet Cat, which is a perfect segue. And I really had this question. I don't think anyone knows except the four of them. Did they really plan this out so super far in advance that they saved all these songs for the very tail end of this run? Or I wonder if they just have so many songs and the resources that they could virtually do anything thematically.
Hard to say. Your Pet Cat works with poster and with the theme of the encore and the narration. So all kind of got woven together.
And in between Your Pet Cat and Once in a Lifetime, the Talking Heads cover, this is where the harpoo that didn't happen happened. Right? This is where the asterisk would come in.
I'd have to go back and look at the set list, but there was definitely at least one time where you had to kind of fudge it to make it work.
Right. It happened, but you didn't see this. Where the Men in Black flashing
something
your
like
eyes.
That, right?
Yeah. And speaking of Once in a Lifetime, Jimmy thinks, how did I get here? And it's not as tight as when they played Remain in Light. But my thought, even while listening to it, however many years later, is it seems unrehearsed, but I have to imagine that's missing the point anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tell whether, it's rehearsed or not, or if it's just something that's spur of the moment, or maybe a combination of two. Well, I guess you can't really have a combination, it's one or the other. You can't tell if something's been rehearsed or not, because even if it's been rehearsed, they could still flub it, or it's not rehearsed, they could nail it. So I think with the Halloween show in '96, that was rehearsed. You have the horns, and you really want to get this nailed down to a T. If it was rehearsed for Dick's, it might not have been rehearsed as much as Halloween, but even if it wasn't 100%, it was still great to hear that come back also.
God bless Page. He really, if it wasn't rehearsed, he's the one who really put in the strong effort vocally to make it happen. That was my thought while listening to it. And it's still charming. It's still fun to listen to. They're that same band at the ROTC dance or whatever, where you're time traveling, that they're making the earnest effort, even if they're in a little bit above their head. And to wrap up the whole thing, United We Stand by the Brotherhood of Man. Did you know this song?
I did not.
Neither did I. But what
I don't
great
think I've heard it
sentiment.
since outside of Phish, but there it was and it worked.
Yeah, and it's a very sweet sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, it was a special way to close out the show, the tour, and the community does stand united quite often as well. So it was a perfect end to it all.
Thanks. I just got to take a moment here at the end of this unbelievable tour to just express our deepest gratitude to all of you as this kind of comes to a close, this summer tour. Also to everybody watching and listening at home, this is for you guys too, and everybody here. Basically what I want to say is that I can't really begin to tell you how much the four of us appreciate and feel blessed to be part of something that's become so, to us at least, you know, I'm talking about what this community and this scene that we look at every night, that's become so beautiful and so unique, you know, like, so, I mean, I know we're up here playing the music, but this is kind of a chance to say that to you. We talk about it a lot backstage, and like, you know, at the festival, and I did here at Dick's, and it's just such a good feeling, and you guys are kind of creating it all. So we feel like we're a small part of that, whatever that is, you know. And we want to thank you guys, really, from the bottom of our hearts. So it was a great summer, and we can't wait to catch up with you on the journey, wherever that goes next. You know, Mexico or whatever. But, you know, there'll be a lot more. Hopefully we'll be back here again.
My favorite part of this, and I don't know if Trey's done this since, and I don't think he's done it before. He thanks the crowd, which of course he's done a billion times, but he even thanks Couch Tour crowd. We count.
You do count.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I can retire.
Well,
but
I guess I'm on the couch too, so yes, we count. I'm on the couch right now.
I thought it was a very sweet thing to acknowledge the fans who are supporting, even though they can't be there for the attendance bias. So Scott, thanks so much for joining us today on Attendance Bias, for going over sections and the entire encore, the thank you encore from September 6, 2015 at Dick's, for all the hard work you do. Even though it's not work, you wouldn't do it if you didn't love it, as you said, of tweeting out set lists in real time, the work you do for Phish.net, the Mockingbird Foundation. Bless all of you. And of course, thank you for being patient with me and being able to narrow down a show that you could speak of. And I really appreciate you being here.
Brian, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
And that's it for today's interview with Scott Marks. And when you're talking to a guy who's on the team for set lists at Phish.net, you got to make sure that you get your facts straight. So now it's time for the attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
When I asked Scott if Phish ever stumped him during a live show when he was tweeting, I brought up the times when Phish played Bliss during a New Year's run after a very long time, as well as when the band played Glide 2 in the middle of Mike's Groove. Both of these rarities were played on the same date, December 30th, 2018, at Madison Square Garden. It was the live debut of Bliss after first appearing on Billy Breathes, and Glide 2 was indeed played in the middle of a Mike's Groove for the first time since May 16, 1995, at the Voters for Choice show in Lowell, Massachusetts, or 872 shows. Scott later brings up that Mock Song might stump him for the first few seconds, which is quite understandable since Mock Song has only been played 3 times ever. July 12, 2003 at the Gorge, August 21st, 2015 at Magnaball, and on October 19, 2018 at the Hampton Coliseum. Finally, in that part of the conversation, Scott mentioned that he was a little stumped on Bye Bye Foot in Providence in 2019. That was on November 29th of that year, and it was played for the first time in 704 shows. It has only been played once since Providence on October 23rd, 2021 in Chula Vista. Although Scott's first show was during the Fall 97 tour in Hartford, he mentioned that he previously wanted to see the band in Hartford in 1996. That show was on October 23rd, 96. Had he gone, he would have seen Bob Galati on a second drum set and an unbelievable sounding second set, including Brother, Tweezer, Lizards, Llama, Slave to the Traffic Light, and more. When talking about why Dick's is such a special venue in the Phish universe, I name-checked Dr. Stephanie Jenkins, who chose a show at Dick's for her spot on Attendance Bias, but I was unsure exactly which show she chose. I was wrong because I guessed the Fuck Your Face show at Dick's from 2012. I was off by a year. Stephanie actually chose the show from September 2nd, 2011, during which Phish played an entire show consisting of songs that began with the letter S. And for the record, her episode was not one of the first Attendance Bias episodes. It was actually the 32nd episode of this podcast. As always, thank you to Dr. Jenkins for all of her amazing hard work with the Mockingbird Foundation and within the Phish community at large. When discussing the encore, I brought up the idea that After Midnight is almost always played at great shows. For your consideration, here is every show where Phish has played the J.J. Cale Classic. First, it debuted on December 31st, 1999 at Big Cypress. It was played on October 26, 2010 in Manchester, New Hampshire, which was a show that was covered on this podcast with guest Donnie B., co-host of Female Centrics. It was played on New Year's Eve 2010 at Madison Square Garden, which was the famous Meat Stick Extravaganza show. It was played on May 31st, 2011 in Holmdel, July 27th, 2013 at the Gorge, which Scott mentioned. Today's show, September 6, 2015 at Dick's, and most recently, December 8, 2019 in Charleston. Scott mentioned that up until this show, Keyboard Army hadn't been played since 1995. The exact date of its prior appearance was December 14, 1995, and that was at the Broome County Veterans Memorial Arena in Binghamton, New York. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. Thank you for joining me today. I'd like to thank Scott Marks of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation for joining me, Phish.net itself for providing all the information we needed for the fact check and otherwise, and Phish.in for a great recording of the music used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app, and reach out to me on social media, usually on Instagram and Twitter. If you say hello, I'm happy to send you a free sticker. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.